All right, so we're starting now, and today's a big day. We have three people on the podcast. On May 6th in America, well, North America, another MCU movie was released, Captain America Civil War. It was Team Captain America versus Team Iron Man, and this is our sixth media podcast. Today, we will be reviewing the recently released movie, and it will be a very similar format as the previous podcast. However, today, we're probably going to go over 30 minutes, and we have a third person on the podcast, our friend Isaac. And we're just going to let him introduce himself, and then we're going to talk about the movie.
Okay, cool. As Xavier mentioned, my name is Isaac. Been these guys' friends for a few years now, and we all enjoy sharing in our analysis of movies and all these different, just any kind of media. So hope I'll be a regular guest on here, but I have to do well today in order to prove myself. So yeah, huge fan of the MCU and this movie in particular because I followed the MCU closely since Iron Man was released back in 2008. But unlike these guys, I've never really delved into the comic books. So although I've heard snippets from what goes on, just from like osmosis and all that jazz, I hope that the fact that I haven't read the comics will add to our discussion today, since we'll be able to compare how the movie was perceived based on me never reading the source material and these guys having examined it closely.
Alright, perfect. So we're also doing a new thing today where it's a Skype call, so the audio might not be as good, but when we all come back in the fall for school, hopefully we can, all three of us can just sit down and then do the podcast like that. This week I'll also be acting sort of as the interviewer and asking the questions. I'll still occasionally weigh in on the subjects. It'll be like our previous podcast. We'll break it into different headings and talk about the movie. And also, so this sort of goes without saying, if you haven't seen the movie yet, there's major spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen it, you should probably stop listening to the podcast now. So first...
All of the spoilers. All of them.
All the spoilers. So first, we'll give our overall opinions of the movie. So what did you guys think about the movie holistically, and which team are you and why?
Alrighty. So let's get this straight. This is not just a movie that you go and watch at the theaters. This is an experience, okay? 10 plus movies have been released that have been building to an event like this. So whether or not you're a fan of like superhero movies or just movies in general, this is a movie that you're not going to want to miss. And for the most part, I really, really enjoyed this movie. A letter grade, I'd probably give it an A-. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. So an overall score of about an 80%. Like a lot of big summer blockbusters, it has its flaws, but man, is this a joy to watch and to rewatch. Something that I want to stress is that the rewatchability of this movie is high. I've seen it twice, and quite frankly, it got even better the second time. So on all accounts, it's a movie you can't miss. In terms of what team I'm on, I've always been and always will be Team Cap, but honestly, kudos to this movie for really blurring the lines of allegiance here. I think I'm Team Cap because what he stands for in this movie is something that's just so fundamental, not just to superheroes, but to everyday life in a democracy, really. He has a line in Winter Soldier where he talks about the price of freedom being high, but it's a price he's willing to pay. And I think that this line is not only so true of his character, but I think it carries into this movie as well. He's a principled person who fights for what he thinks is right, which at times is selfish, and he certainly abandons reason. But he's doing it for the freedom of those he loves, and he at least is principled enough to stand by those decisions. So not only is he a great superhero, but he's a role model that I think you can really get behind, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, alright, so also really enjoyed this movie. It came out of the theater, well, first of all, 3 weeks ago, because I was in the UK watching this, came out of it giving it like an 8.5, and I definitely would stick like around a solid 8.5 rating. So ideally I'd like to watch it again to better examine certain aspects that I missed on the first go around and examine this rewatchability that Mason's talking about. But yeah, just definitely a really enjoyable movie. I think the obvious part that sticks out for me in this movie compared to other Marvel movies is the ambiguity between right and wrong. So we obviously have this very gray area. So we have our heroes on either side, which is something we haven't experienced before in the MCU. It's always been very like aliens are attacking from above, or there's this obvious AI bad villain that we have to attack or save the world from. But with the splitting of the team on opposite sides, it creates this very compelling debate and this gray area of right and wrong that for the fans to fall into and really become involved in this discussion. So I came into this movie firmly on Team Iron Man, purely on a moral standpoint. So I think this is a correct quote from the movie, but it says, Stark says at one point, "If we don't accept limitations, we're no better than the bad guys." So that really encapsulates my argument for picking a side, since it's simple to view the Avengers as fighting against evil, but when evil becomes more ambiguous than aliens fighting from space, or fighting means hundreds of thousands of people dead, then there needs to be some sort of discretion in who chooses when, where, and how to fight. So this is my opinion coming into the movie, but I really loved that the way the movie tackled this argument, because I found myself agreeing with some of Cap's points, like from the very beginning, which I didn't expect to at all. So I think this shows the success of the movie in creating that gray area. And also the final point before we move on is I really like the toned down nature of this movie. So I started an article examining this a few days ago as well, but it's that this wasn't an end of the world movie. Like, there wasn't going to be a big explosion, there wasn't going to be an alien invasion, but it was really about the characters and their internal struggles. So that's not something we've seen in these last 4 or 5 Marvel movies, and I really enjoyed that the stakes felt more genuine because the outcome wasn't as obvious as just saving the world.
Wow, I agree with both of you, because there are points from both sides, but I would still be Team Iron Man. But personally, I really enjoyed the movie, I think more so because I read the comic, because the movie employed so many aspects from the graphic novel, such as the bombing in the beginning of the movie, the team switching, the prison, the registering with the UN, all of that stuff. I didn't know how they were actually going to creatively include all those things from the graphic novel into the movie, and they still did it, even though it must have been incredibly hard. So I really appreciate the writing that they did for the movie. It was really well adapted for the screen. Also, when I watched the movie, I noticed the directing a lot. I thought that the directing for this movie was very different, and that was good, because you have all these different directors directing these different Marvel movies, and I like that. So there's a little bit of a different flavor to each Marvel movie, even though it's still all in the same universe. Overall, I'd give this movie an 8.10. Even though I thought it was amazing, I rated it higher coming out of the movie, but I would still just give it an 8.10, 8 out of 10 now. On a prior episode of our podcast, I said I was Team Iron Man. I'm still Team Iron Man, because I believe if there was a world where there were superheroes, this is all hypothetical, and the common people like us, we would also want them probably to register somewhere to keep them in check. Like Isaac said, they can't just go out and do what they think is right, because then they are the bad guys. This is the same thing with Superman. How do we know he's always going to be doing the right thing? So I would be all for registering, and that's why I'm Team Iron Man. It's just the logical thing to do, and it makes people feel safe. So the second question is, what's your favorite part of the movie? Or what's your favorite moment in the movie? And your favorite character in the movie? So Isaac,
this is my last minute answer. Me writing it and literally down. But it is ultimately, this is still a superhero movie. We do watch these movies for the dope action sequences as much as the emotional arguments and the character development adds to it. It's all about these nuts action scenes. So mine was really my favorite one. Other than the airport scene was fucking amazing, crazy, extravagant, probably more superheroes than we've ever seen fighting. But I really liked Bucky's escape. So yeah, after he gets mind wiped and mind controlled by Zemo in the holding facility, it's just systematic takedown, just absolutely brutal escape, and just knocking through all these different characters. So we see we see Black Widow come out, we see Falcon come out at one point, we see Black Panther, we see Iron Man with his fold out watch, which is just another expansion on the Iron Man costume. That's awesome to see. And then there were also, like, again, with, like, really cool stakes in this movie, the moment, and this was, like, teased before in the trailers, where Iron Man grabs Bucky's gun, and Bucky has no hesitation, just shoots it off, and is going for the kill at that point. And in the trailers, this was kind of thrown off because we didn't, like, why is Bucky doing this? Why is he trying to kill? And the mind control and his activation really explained that. But so, yeah, great fucking scene.
Awesome.
Alrighty. My favorite part, I've got 2 words for everyone. One is giant, and the other is man. Holy cow. So in our review podcast that Xavier and I did, I mentioned that it would be a really missed opportunity not to include Giant Man. But towards the end of that podcast, I kind of actually talked myself out of him appearing in this movie. And I'm so happy to say that on all accounts, my prediction was wrong. The absurdity and the hilarity and that, like, awe-striking moment was just gone for, with, like, total gleeful abandon. And you'd think that the director is kind of making a joke of something as impactful to the story of Civil War as Giant Man would be a no-go, but it was just handled so well in this movie. And I remembered while I was watching it, this isn't the Bill Foster Giant Man, this isn't the Hank Pym Ant-Man we're seeing, this is the Scott Lang Ant-Man. He's comedic relief. He's like an everyman in a superhero suit. So I think the comedic timing and the visual effects and everything that they did with Giant Man was just so great. It was a huge fan service, and I'm so happy that we got it. Honestly, if you had told me, age 11-year-old Mason, that we were not only going to get a Giant Man in the movie, but that people were going to laugh and love it and be excited for it, I would have just scoffed. I would have been like, no, that's not going to happen. But honestly, they went for it in this movie, and I think that worked just on all accounts. He's not my favorite character, though. I think that spot is still reserved for the Black Panther. This was a great introduction to him, and it really nailed the essence of the character that we see in the comics. So at first, he's this vengeful, spirited vigilante whose stake in the fight is really just to straight up kill someone who he thinks killed his father. But by the end of the movie, when he rescues Zemo from suicide, we get to see the impact that his role, not only in the Civil War, but that his interactions with the Avengers had on his motivations. And it made not only for a great character who actually developed in a movie that's not even his, but it also got me hyped for his solo movie. I already was, but now I'm convinced that the Black Panther, as the lead character, will actually have some depth to it.
Alright, I liked all of those parts too, but my favorite part was when Bucky was down and injured without an arm, and then Cap and Iron Man are just duking it out, and then the camera like pans slowly and time slows down, and Captain America has his shield blocking Iron Man's blast and the light that was just shimmering off of it, creating that blast of energy, was epic. Because it came from the graphic novel's art, so that was amazing. So I just like to that's like cover photo worthy on Facebook. But my favorite character in the movie would have to be Vision. It's just hilarious. He's like a dad in the Avengers compound. But also Black Panther was sick too. Yeah. He has no idea what he's doing. But Vision also had a really like human side to him in this movie. He had like emotions and feelings. He's not just this all-knowing robot that's synthetically made. Yeah, and he was like becoming encultured in human matters. I also think he's going to die soon because he does have one of the Infinity Stones literally lodged into his forehead, and Thanos is going to need that for the gauntlet. And in order for him to get the whole gauntlet, he's going to have to die. So I think at the end of part 1, Vision is going to die at the end of it, and he's going to acquire that last Infinity Stone that he needs to complete it, and then he'll have the full thing, and then part 2 of the Infinity Wars will be them just fighting, basically. So yeah, third.
So before we start this third question, how about we do like Mason will make his point, and then let's like discuss it a little bit, because I'm sure there are things that we disagree about here. So like get some good discussion going rather than just points.
Okay.
All right.
So do you want to just discuss that last question, or?
What we didn't like about the movie. So like Mason will make his point, and then we can talk about what he didn't like and so on.
All right, go ahead, Mason.
Alrighty. So my main dislike with this movie is that at some points I think the story loses itself in trying to be two things. It has to be a sequel to Captain America: The Winter Soldier, but it also has to be a continuation of the two Avengers movies that we've seen so far. And sometimes the movie really convinces you that it's a Captain America sequel, but other times it just takes off with the Avengers stuff and it leaves Cap's world behind. And I think this is really evident when you think long and hard about Sharon and Peggy Carter's place in the movie, which, might I add, are two characters, two things in a Captain America movie that you should never question. And these two characters are so crucial to his development and to his motivation that they can't just be left behind in the dust when everything's going on big picture. But unfortunately, I think the movie forgets about them, and in some cases, it even writes around them, and it doesn't do them the justice that they deserve. So let's consider Peggy for a second. She dies in this movie. Like, she's gone. That's a huge deal. Well, rather, it should be a huge deal. Instead, her funeral scene and her eulogy are used as plot devices to place Cap on the side that he needs to be on when the Civil War comes to blows. And someone, in my opinion, like Peggy, can't be treated this way in a Captain America movie. Her role cannot be reduced to a plot convenience that writes off important decisions for a main character. So in giving Peggy's eulogy, Sharon talks about how Peggy needed to plant her feet and not move, even when the world's trying to push you out of the way, something like that. This is great on paper, since theoretically it gives Cap the justification that he needs for being so protective of Bucky, but that's not what Peggy Carter was about. 2 seasons of her own show, Agent Carter, proved this wrong in a heartbeat. Peggy Carter is about moving forward and breaking down these conventional conservative ways of thinking for the betterment of the modern world. Peggy's pro-change, and she'd hate to see Steve so stuck in his ways. That's how Peggy survived in the man's world. She pushed the envelope of what women could do in a patriarchal society. And she welcomed change, and she took advantage of these different ways of thinking. But Sharon's eulogy that she gives Peggy in this movie writes around this development that 2 seasons of Agent Carter worked so hard to establish. And this is really kind of frustrating, considering the fact that the showrunners of Agent Carter not only were the writers of this movie, but they're the ones who adapted her from the comics to screen in Cap 1. So coincidentally, that's the adaptation that made her the fantastic feminist icon, which we have so little of in Marvel movies. But the movie needed Cap to pose himself as anti-Accord or anti-registration, so the movie wrote over her development in her own show to give her this motivation. And I just felt that was really sloppy and lazy writing. And you can especially see this when it comes to Sharon, who's completely written out of this movie before the airport fight. Her job in this movie is literally to get Team Cap the information that they need at the most convenient time, and also to get them away from Team Iron Man so that they have time to recruit, and to kind of just be this half-assed love interest for Steve so that we cared if he made it out of the movie or not. And I didn't buy that romance at all between the two of them, and neither should you, because it's poorly done. To be fair, like, they don't have great source material to work with. Like, Agent 13 also didn't really sell me as Cap's lover in the comic books either, but that doesn't mean that she should be reduced to a bit role in order to move the plot along. It's like the writers realized that she couldn't really be of... They just kind of dropped her off the face of the earth. And doing that to Sharon, I don't really think that's the best idea. Overall, like, just to condense my criticism here, kind of consolidate it, my criticism is that the movie never sold me on what it was meant to be. Is this a sequel to Winter Soldier? Is this kind of like an Avengers epilogue or an Avengers prequel? The casualties of this identity crisis is the supporting cast of Cap's movies, and the Carters aren't the only ones. Like Black Widow, she's gone before the 3rd act. She literally just disappears. She's not mentioned again. I know it's supposed to be about her like going into hiding, but I think that some closure, whether it was a line or a small scene, would have been more effective. Overall, what I didn't like about the movie is that it didn't do a lot of side characters the justice they deserve, and I don't think that the writing was up to par with Winter Soldier.
Okay.
Wow.
I think, like, first of all, I didn't see this at all in the movie, like the whole, like, the treatment of the Carters, but I think that is probably because I'm not as attuned to Cap's development and how crucial they are to his character, like where he came from. And I think that's also probably because I treated this more as an Avengers movie rather than a Cap movie. So, like, we did see glimmers of, like, following Cap and stuff, but at the same time, like, it was almost balanced out by the individual Iron Man story that we saw in this movie. So I think it was definitely leaning towards more of an Avengers storyline than it was a Cap storyline, and I think because of that, that's why those crucial characters in his development were left off the table. So a question for Mason then: how would you have rather seen these characters treated in this movie?
That's kind of like, that's the Star Trek Kobayashi Maru, right? Like, I don't think you can win in either situation, and I wouldn't, like, I would fault the writers on not fully committing to one or the other, because, like, we do get glimmers of an Avengers continuation at times, but they don't really go 100% with that. Then we see a personal Cap and Tony movie, and they don't really go 100% with that. They kind of hold back on that too. And then we see glimmers of a Winter Soldier sequel, but also, again, that doesn't go 100%. So what I think I would have, to make this movie the best well-written movie that it could have been, I think that they should have committed to either being an Avengers follow-up or a Captain America or Winter Soldier sequel. Would that have made it like the crazy exciting movie that we got? No, it wouldn't have, so that definitely would have suffered. But again, if I put Civil War on my Blu-ray collection shelf, which by the way is like hella organized, it goes way more beyond just alphabetical order. Where do I put this movie? Do I put it with the other two Cap movies, or do I put it with the two Avengers movies? Like, where do I put this movie? It has kind of this identity crisis, and it doesn't really go 100% in where it's supposed to go. So to answer the question, I would have picked whether or not this was Avengers Civil War or Captain America Civil War, and I would have just gone full-blown with that. But I do kind of acknowledge at the same time that wouldn't have made it this like really awesome action-packed movie that we got in the end. So
yeah, okay, cool.
I think it's because they had so much to do, though. Like, so Captain America Civil War is the graphic novel. That's the title, right? Or is it, what is the title? Just Civil War?
It's Marvel's Civil War.
Marvel Civil War. So that's why I think it's like actually an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
Because they have to incorporate all the stuff from the comic book, or like work in as much as they can, obviously excluding things that they don't have the rights to. And then also work in the Winter Soldier aspect too. So there's like they compacted like way too much. Like the movie's long as it is, but they had to like push everything in. So that's why they can't really like go into each and every detail that like the Carter stories or anything like that. That's why I think.
And that's why I think it's the Kobayashi Maru, right? Because if the movie chose to focus on Cap's life and him being Steve Rogers, then the criticism would have been, you know, why do we have so many Avengers here if you're going to do so little with them? So I think the writers, the studio, etc., the whole creative team behind this movie, I think that they picked the side that was the most interesting to watch visually, and I think that they kind of put their toe in the waters of each different option that they could have had to pursue in order to please a little bit of everyone, but they didn't go 100% into what they could have. But that, again, that's why it's
so do you think that they chose the best option then?
No matter,
do you think that this is the best possible outcome, or do you think it could have been done better? Because, like, you know that they, like, given the context, you know they have to, like, dip their toe into all these different things. So, like, that's really hard, right? So, do you think it's, like, is the outcome of the movie...
I'm not going to...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm not going to pretend that I can even sit down and write a better movie. Like, like I said in the beginning, like, the movie that we get is fantastic, and I'm happy that this Civil War that I live to see in my lifetime. But it's just not a perfect movie. I don't think I could write it any better. I just don't think... I don't know. Maybe it never could have been perfect. I don't know. At that point, it's kind of hypothetical, but...
Yeah, building, like, I think what Marvel has done really well with their universe so far is that they've had, like, this kind of central Avengers storyline that they first built up to with the first Avengers, and then have, like, contributed to with all these storylines. But this Captain America, because it was a Captain America movie, it was taking too much of that central storyline load and didn't take up enough of the sides, like a side Captain America story. Like, it could just be that they're too intertwined at this point to take Cap away from the situation, because people always say in other Marvel movies, like, oh, why don't we just call the Avengers? Because, like, that's a thing that you can do now.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
So you're saying, like, the Avengers is, like, the backbone storyline, and then everything else just, I'd agree with that, too. All right. So do you want to switch over to your point, Isaac?
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, basically what I disliked about this movie is that while it was a more personal movie, and I did feel that the stakes were more genuine than some other movies, I disliked that nobody actually died. So, basically, I think Marvel need to grow some balls and knock off one of their main characters. So, and that would have really, really knocked home for a lot of people. Like, there's no way in modern storytelling, the way we've come from different movies, and you have throwing out like a series like Game of Thrones, where you have to have real stakes and you have to see these main characters die in order to feel those feelings. So, really, all that we got in terms of consequences was Rhodey getting partially paralyzed, but he was walking by the end of the movie, and then Bucky lost his arm. But it is just a metal arm, so it's not like that's gonna be permanent. He already lost his real arm. So I need to get a real sense of loss from the consequences of this movie's conflicts. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I was leaning towards the idea of Cap dying, which I thought could be a possibility at some points during that climactic fight scene, but I do think that ultimately it's too soon. So while Marvel has set up his demise with the introduction of Falcon and Winter Soldier as possible successors, I think his death, kind of along the same vein as Vision, could work better at some point during Infinity War Part 1, or however they choose to do that, if he dies at some point during the storyline.
Alright, so my point actually kind of ties into yours, so I'm just gonna... So I completely agree with Isaac. I really think that there should have been a death, and it would have been such an emotional turning point. So if Rhodey died from plummeting down from that massive drop, then each team would step back and have to reevaluate their stance. So wow, this actually happened. Somebody actually died. This is getting out of hand, and then everyone would have to be okay, what the fuck am I actually doing? So so that's what I want to add to that. Did you have anything, Mason?
No, I completely agree on all fronts. I think there were so many opportunities in this movie to kill, and we're not out for blood here. I love Don Cheadle and I love War Machine, especially what he means to Iron Man. But there were so many opportunities in this movie where a character could have bitten it, and there could have been this huge, like you said, Xavier, a moment where everyone's oh my god, someone that was either an Avenger or someone close to me is actually now dead because we didn't put our big sticks down. So I completely agree with this criticism. I think it's one that I've seen across all the message boards, across all the news outlets, that the stakes really, literally the only person who died in this movie, if we can tie this back to Peggy, the only person who dies in this movie dies of old age. And in Civil War, that's a little ridiculous. Let's consider that for a second. But no, I completely agree.
How does that compare to the comic books? Were there significant deaths in the comics?
Oh yeah. So Giant Man is actually... Sorry, Mason, were you going to say something?
I was going to explain Giant Man, but go ahead, man.
Yeah, so in the comic books, they're at Tony Stark's abandoned factory, and they're fighting there, and then a clone of Thor comes out of nowhere and actually blasts Giant Man right through the heart with a gigantic electrical blast. And then that actually does happen. Everyone takes a step back, wow, what the fuck did what happened? Did Thor actually just do this? And then everyone rallies back together. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's the moment where Spider-Man takes a step back, because he's originally Team Iron Man in the comic books, and that's the moment after Bill Foster dies where Spider-Man's oh my god, someone actually died during this conflict. I did not expect that, and that's when he switches over to Team Cap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. And I can imagine that, specific sequence of events, obviously not with the clone of Thor, but in terms of, Giant Man dying, and then this innocent, naive Spider-Man that we meet in this movie just coming to that realization. So that would have been huge across the board for all these different characters.
Yeah. Alright, so should we move to question 4?
Let's do it.
Alright.
Yeah, cool.
So...
Skip me.
So what are you excited for the future in the MCU, or what do you think is going to happen in the future movies? So I guess Mason, you go ahead.
Sure. So personally, I'm excited for all the characters that we were introduced to in this movie and where they're going next. We met 2 new characters in this movie. We got the first live-action adaptation of Black Panther, and we got a new Spider-Man. I think that both were done amazingly in this movie, and I'm so excited for their solo movies. There's so many places that they can go, and there's umpteen different possibilities. So just theorizing about what's going to happen in each of these individual movies, and if there's ever going to do a crossover, is just so much fun to do. Civil War did a great job of setting up possibility instead of just streamlining everyone's stories and telling us like flat out where they're going to go. What I'm most excited for, though, is Infinity War Part 1, and I think it's because I want to see how the Avengers come back from this. Like, I want to see how they have to come back as a team and fight a huge threat and deal with something as imposing as the Infinity Stones altogether when they've gone through such a bad breakup. Like, we've criticized the fact that they're all alive, which is totally fair, but even though they're alive, they're not really the Avengers at the peak of their abilities like they were in that opening sequence to Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
They've got some serious recovery to do from this Civil War, and some of them aren't even on world. Like, Thor and the Hulk are missing, which is another thing I'm really excited for. Thor Ragnarok. Hulk is confirmed to be in that movie with him, and General Ross, when he's showing them the Accords, he gives a little shout out to them, and he's like, tell me, Captain, so 2 of your most powerful hitters can't even be accounted for. Do you know where Thor and Banner are?
Yeah.
And I think that even though the Thor films are kind of mediocre at best, this movie made me wonder what are Thor and the Hulk doing on Asgard? Where were they that they were so busy that they couldn't just beam down for a second and smack some sense into Steve and Tony? But overall, I'm excited for what this movie's ripple effect is going to be on the other movies coming out in Phase 3, and I'm excited for the new characters that we were introduced to.
All right. So for that Black Panther that you mentioned, do you know if it's going to be like a prequel to this, or is it after the events of
pretty
it?
sure it's coming out after these events.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So do you think it's going to be like another Avengers movie, like how Captain America: Civil War is sort of like an Avengers movie? Do you think the same thing's going to happen? Because they are in Wakanda, all of them now.
Yeah.
Like the Secret Avengers. So do you think?
So yeah, Kevin Feige, who's big head honcho at Marvel,
producer.
He said that the Black Panther movie is going to be the movie that sets up Infinity War Part 1, kind of how Winter Soldier set up Age of Ultron, and how Thor and Cap 1 in Phase 1 set up Avengers number 1.
Yeah.
He said that the Black Panther movie is the movie that you're going to kind of want to see before you go see Infinity War, because apparently that's the movie that's going to set it all up. So I think in that, he maybe gave away that what's going on in the Black Panther movie is going to be really kind of
so it's
really
more of an
closely
Avengers
related.
Movie then, eh? It's not so much of a solo movie, probably.
I don't know. They've really only just hired the director, so they could. There's again 1,000 different possibilities they could do, but it sounds like there will at least be some appearances from other people.
Interesting.
I think the chance that they have with Black Panther. So we talk about how this was a Captain America movie, but was it an Avengers movie? So in some sense, there could be that worry with a Black Panther movie as well, seeing as it's been said that they're going to be setting up for Infinity War. But I think where hopefully how Black Panther is set apart is in the world building, because Wakanda is so different from any place that we've explored on Earth so far, and there are all these internal disagreements and conflicts that we've just have no idea about. And I think that the teaser scene at the end of Civil War, where we see Cap in Wakanda and it slowly pans out and we see that giant stone panther, is probably the one, if I had to pick a still image that would get me most hyped, that's the one. That just looked so cool, and I want to know more.
I also loved Black Panther's costume. That was so cool. Even though it had no cape, I was like, God damn, that's a cool unitard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The way he moved, too, just so differently than any other character.
I loved it.
Awesome.
Sick. Alright, what did I say here? I mentioned nothing.
Doctor Strange.
Yeah, Doctor Strange. There's nothing... the next movie that's coming out is Doctor Strange. I don't think there's going to be a crossover, or there's going to be very little. There may be, a shout-out to an event, or like a single character, but I don't know if you guys are like super hyped for this movie. Like, I love the trailer, that was cool, but I'm gonna see the movie and everything, but I don't think it's gonna really affect the storyline. What do you think? It's hard to say.
Well, Mason and I talked about this briefly, and you were talking about how alternate dimensions might factor into later storylines.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that Doctor Strange's like solo movie is going to be really like terribly influenced by anything that we see in Civil War. Like, again, as you said, Xavier, there's probably going to be some kind of shout out to an event that happened in this movie or some kind of fallback. But I think the Doctor Strange movie, especially since he's kind of a hard sell, like he has the same issue that the Guardians of the Galaxy and that Ant-Man had. Like, he's not, from a traditional standpoint, the easiest superhero to market. So I think this movie really needs to focus on making him interesting and making him accessible to many different viewers that watch these movies. So again, like I think there's potential for him to cross over in his solo movie. I don't really think that they'll go for that, though. I think it's very much just going to be his first chapter.
It's like a focus on Doctor Strange because he's a lesser known superhero, so it's probably just going to introduce him to sell him for future movies. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay. So the last question is: do you think that the movie lived up to the hype? And
all right,
go ahead,
so
Mason.
Short and sweet. Is this a perfect movie? Heck no. But is it a fantastic and is it a damn near perfect superhero movie? Yes, it is. It's so much fun to watch and to think about and to talk about. Like, I've seen this movie twice. I'm talking about it right now and I'm still having a blast thinking about everything and remembering everything that I watched. There's so many moments that are memorable, and it's because they're so just fantastic and they're so fun. Disappointments aside, I'd be lying to myself if I said this movie didn't satisfy me both times I saw it. I certainly wish the writing was a bit cleaner in terms of story, and I wish that it was maybe more focused in parts, but it's definitely going in my Blu-ray collection. I'm totally buying Captain America Civil War merch, and I'm really proud that a movie like this exists. So for me, it lived up to the hype, for sure.
I don't like the rewatchability because I've seen it 3 times in a week now.
But you watched it 3 times in a week. I at least had like some time to digest and to figure things out.
You watched it like 2 times in like 5 days. That's like basically.
You're just exposing yourself at this point to so many like things. Like, how many times have you seen Giant Man transform? 3. An unhealthy amount. That is how much.
You just pace yourself, man.
All right.
I think it lived up to the hype too. Like, there were so many difficulties and there's so many places where this movie could have fallen flat. And yeah, obviously it is incredibly hard to make a perfect movie, but like I think the interplay between the personal relationships was amazing. I think they balanced the large cast as well as they could, trying to accommodate these two different Captain America and Avengers stories. The fight scenes were awesome. We got amazing introductions for Spider-Man and Black Panther. Like, this was a good movie. This is a solid movie.
Yep, I agree. So overall, it was really good. Everything. I like very few complaints. Like, the only major complaint is that no one died. That's like my only complaint.
Okay, I'll give the stupidest moment in the movie was the way that Zemo killed that Russian general. Like, did that guy have no abs? Like, he could have just leaked up a little bit. It's fucking pathetic.
Yeah,
and his nose wasn't even like in the water.
Watch and you're like,
oh my god, that was bad. Also, I don't know, like the camera placement also when Bucky was killing Stark's parents, it's like they're in the middle of a forest and there just happens to be a camera right there. It's like it's a little much.
Yeah.
You know.
What did they ever explain where that camera was from? Like why it was there?
Nope.
It was just there.
I think what we were supposed to believe was that was like a traffic camera, and since Hydra, evil Hydra is always everywhere, they managed to like get the footage and store. I don't know why they'd store it, but I think they tried to write it off as like Hydra had the footage and they didn't release it. And,
yeah.
I don't know.
And Captain America knew the whole time. It's like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
He did, though. See, a lot of people were confused about that. But there's that scene in Winter Soldier where they find Zola in the computer in the army base, and when he's explaining how Hydra was really S.H.I.E.L.D. the whole time, there's this moment where it's implied that it was the Winter Soldier that assassinated the Starks. He doesn't verbally confirm it, but when he's showing like the pictures of all the Hydra things that they've been nefariously plotting, there's the newspaper clipping of Howard and Maria Stark's death, and then it cuts to the Winter Soldier, and the audience is meant to kind of be like, oh, okay, like, yeah, he did it.
Okay, I
so
see.
Cap did know. He did know.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. I'd forgotten about that.
Also, sorry, go ahead.
The another amazing moment was the bicep curl of freedom. Calling it when Cap is trying to stop Bucky from escaping, grabbing that helicopter, and he's got this great overhand grip, and then he switches to an underhand grip and gets this flex on. Like,
Absolutely. You know
all of the girls in the theater just sploosh.
Exactly. That's the scene that, for all the girlfriends that their boyfriends dragged to this movie, that was for them being like, yo, I'm sorry you got dragged to this. Here's some gratuitous Chris Evans arm.
Yeah. Good shit.
Alright.
Also, like, although the love interest with Agent 13, like, not completely buying it, but when they got that kiss, and Cap looks back at Bucky and Falcon, and they just both go, yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Can you move your seat up?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, the back and forth between Falcon and Bucky, hilarious.
Yeah.
Alright, so this podcast has gone over for 40 minutes now, so I think we should end this. Thanks for listening. Thanks for Isaac for joining us. Hopefully he'll come back. You can find our...
This was awful.
Oh, okay. You can listen to our other podcasts on the YouTube channel and SoundCloud. Please give us any feedback and comment whatever you want. I don't care. And thanks for listening.